of the Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency for Wednesday, September 18th to order. At this point, we'll do roll call. Do the pledge. I hope. Following the order on the paper here. We'll do roll call. Get the roll call.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Crescent.
Yes. All right. So we have a full forum here. At this point, rise to the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, this part of the meeting, we open it up to public comments. If anybody has anything they would like to address the board on an item that is not on the agenda, they could do so now. Not seeing anything. I know that we were all given a email from a member of the public.
Correct.
So,
And no, there's no additional public comment received by email.
okay. So seeing no additional public comment, we will close public comment. Move on to the consent agenda. Would the board members like to pull anything from consent?
Nope.
Not, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Cox, seconded by Smelser. Additional comment? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. An agenda has been approved. Move to the regular agenda. Item 1 is a review and approval of the August 2024 financial results. Liz.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday. So I'm here today to talk about the results, our financial results compared to budget for the month of August. Oh, I have to put it. I'm like, wow, I feel so empowered right now. It did. We're already winning. So here are the charts that I brought to you last month that we're going to take a look at through this entire fiscal year. This is the revenue side of the house. The first chart is the entire budget. The second chart are the actuals and where we're at year to date. The idea of this chart is to visually complement the data that is in your packet. So let's talk a little bit about revenues. Fund 10 did recognize some revenue. It took our regular service charge accrual, but we received a teeter payment from Placer. That was our 5% for the end of last fiscal year that we received as cash in this year. We also received some fund interest in all of the funds. For Fund 2, there was also income from connection fees. And again, for Fund 6, it was just the fund interest. I will note at this point that 17% of the fiscal year have elapsed and 11% of the total budget, when we look at expenses right here, have been expensed. So we're trending a little less than the progress of the fiscal year, not an abnormal trend for here. Taking a look at the expenditures, nothing extremely noteworthy here, all status quo as we expected. We're starting to see some project expenses come in. I will draw your attention in your packet on the financials that were for Fund 2. There are a few projects that had capital expenditures related to budgeted projects for FY24, but the expenditures came in until FY25. We have to follow accounting rules. If the work wasn't done until this fiscal year, we have to book it then. And that's a conversation we will revisit next month when I bring you the quarter end results. So again, nothing unexpected that we saw in the budgeted revenue or expenditures. I wanted to draw your attention to the cash charts that we take a look at. Total cash remained relatively the same based on income and outgoing expenditures. But last month I was here and asked for a budget transfer or a fund transfer, and I wanted to show you the result of that. So if you take a look at the Fund 6 chart, you'll notice that that blue line representing FY25 shot up. We funded our projects in Fund 6. which was something we hadn't done in the prior year. The Fund 7 chart and the Fund 10 chart reflect that downward trend because we moved money from those two funds and allocated it so that we could spend it in Fund 6. So I wanted to show you that illustration. Other than that, everything was status quo for the month. Are there any questions from the board based on the revenue or expenditures? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. So at this point, entertain a motion to approve our August 24 financial results.
I move to approve the August 24 financial results.
Second. Motion and second. Any other comments on finances? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. Go on to item 2, the review and approval of the high strength waste study. Yeah.
Morning, board members, Scott Fleming, senior engineer, TPSA. So if you guys recall, last month I came up and I presented briefly on high strength waste receiving a TPSA. That initial discussion, the intent behind it was to provide more background on what came out of the Jacobs preliminary design report for digestion improvements. Historically, the agency has not taken high strength waste receiving in the region. We've been contacted by entities, including Reno Rendering for FOG, as well as the town of Truckee / TTSD as well, that consider taking food waste for co-digestion. So we're currently ongoing doing final design work for digestion improvements. And this question has come up again, time and place, with that PDR, that based off the data that we have for our current biogas production, we have a shortfall. I'm giving a high level overview of supplemental gas needed in the winter for heating demand for the plant. So if we consider taking high strength waste in the future, we might be able to offset some of our demand for biogas for the facility and reduce some of our utility bills, as well as charging a tipping fee that could offset costs as well and provide benefits to the community as well as the environment by putting that biogas to beneficial use. So with that in mind, I presented to you guys last month to get interest. The direction given was to reach out to consultants and try to find someone that would be interested in doing that study for the agency. It was also mentioned that we should consider using the same consultant we're currently ongoing work with for digestion improvements. There's some harmonies there for cost. So with that in mind, and time being of the nature of it, I contacted Brown and Caldwell, or the agency did, got a proposal with the scope and fee that are attached to this recommendation to the board. Basically staff are at this point recommending that we enter an agreement with Brown and Caldwell to perform the high strength waste receiving evaluation in the amount of $49,295. And I think, Dan, you might have mentioned previously that we could consider adding a contingency on for design consultants, similar to what we do for construction, in the event we need to add additional scope without having to come back to the board. So I'm requesting it for up to $55,000. We would execute a services agreement for the $49,000 with the idea if we need additional funds, if anything pops up that was unforeseen during design, that we can tap into the 55. So that's it. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions on it. So the footprint would be the basic footprint of TTSA. So down to West Shore, all those. When the material would come into the facility, in the notes here, it's pre-screened and pre-processed before. How does that happen?
So depending on the type of material received, there's kind of a couple different ones on the table. So food waste typically is slurried by the solids handling company, and that's something our consultants been emphatic about. Is most facilities that are receiving food waste, you think the Bay Area facilities are requiring it be slurried. The question becomes who's responsible for doing that. Typically that's put on the solids waste hauler that's equipped to do that. Otherwise it might trigger certain requirements with CalRecycle as far as receiving solid waste. So the agency being in the business of treating wastewater, we need to receive the waste as a slurry or a liquid for us to stay out of CalRecycle's crosshairs, in my opinion. That's what was discussed with our consultant. So TTSD was trying to push that. Like we've had some initial discussions with them in Placer County about the agency considering consolidating that facility on one location, but, yeah, we would most likely stick with requiring them to bring it to us pre-slurried and screened. So inorganics are the big concern with food waste. You think like sporks and other plastic inorganics, we want to make sure we remove those prior to receiving them. Otherwise, it's taking up capacity in our anaerobic digesters. So
Who currently does that?
the slurring.
Yeah.
So currently, TTSD has a contract to compost with the town as well as Placer County. That solid waste or food waste is diverted due to state bills. They take it out to a composter in Nevada currently. So they're looking to offset cost of hauling down to Nevada as well as provide a local resource for greenhouse gas emission reductions. So
Okay.
currently, nobody is slurring that material here in North Lake Tahoe.
Okay. Yeah, I found that kind of interesting. I was trying to figure out. Basically going almost from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, and a little more detail to that. So in order for the agency to consider acceptance of food waste for anaerobic co-digestion, we would have to develop a spec with certain stringent requirements for accepting or rejecting that material. So you think like, you see the bear boxes, right? They get pretty smelly. The odors can be pretty extreme. And in the summer months, you have problems with the going rancid. So certain time elements might come into play with that agreement if we were to enter into one with one of the other waste haulers, as well as if we consider fats, oils, and greases will fall with Reno Rendering. And to give some context, we actually just were contacted again. Michael, was it last week they reached out for us to consider taking fats, oils, and grease? So there's some really good CWEA information about the benefits of co-digestion and the beneficial biogas production. Bang for your buck, fats, oils, and grease provides a lot of added benefit relative to the cost for anaerobic digestion. But in that presentation, I hit on a couple of our major concerns of the agency, specifically with ensuring we have capacity in our digesters, and the intent of the study would to be flushing those things out, as well as the criteria for what the tipping fee would be to establish to recoup the cost for the infrastructure for us to offer the service.
And then I'm assuming there's a certain level of solids that come out of that process.
Yeah.
Would that go to?
So in the co-digestion model, we don't have a dedicated, like specifically digester for food waste in the bog. So it would be blended in, mixed with the rest of our solids. There are concerns, so I'm looking at Michael, because one of the pieces they have to look at is the study, as well as we have a centrate line. So when we centrifuge our solids out, we have a centrate line that gets fed back to the head of the plant. And those loadings in that centrate line could change depending on what the composition of our solids are based off of what we accept. So it's something where we gotta be mindful that we don't overload the plant by taking additional slugs of solids in that could impact our centrate line or feed back to the plant. So that's also a piece in the study as well.
Thank you.
So, cost benefit, I looked down here, San Francisco spent 2.2 billion doing. What are we looking at?
So, I mean, that would be
Yes,
part of the intent, but the facility improvements, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, you could be talking about a 10-year payback of $1 million that we might be looking to recoup as part of this project, where, what the consultant has emphasized is typically the tipping fees recoup back more of the cost than the biogas offset for our natural gas usage. So, you think 1/3 of the recoup on us using fuel oil or natural gas, 2/3 from a tipping fee. So, the initial conversations with TTSD and Placer County have been challenging in that we don't have specifics yet on what would be an acceptable tipping fee, and that would be something that we're looking to come out of the study, but just determine that number for recoup for payback period. But I've been, the word Jason, I've been reassured that the payback is there with the appropriate fee, so.
Yeah, what they're basically proposing to back into it in our. So if we say we want to see an ROI of 10 years,
Yeah.
5 years, or 8 years, that's kind of the basis of design for what kind of facility we put in.
If the tipping fee greatly exceeds what they already pay to haul it composting facility, it's probably not a viable option. If it's competitive or better, then we know they'd probably prefer to come here.
Yeah, it depends on funding sources as well. Keep Truckee Green, when we spoke with them, they have to be mindful of their rates with the town, agreements with Placer County, TTSD as well. So there's a balance there that would need to be walked out, but the study is really intended to develop what our requirements would be for receiving, what the cost would be, what our recoup period would be, as well as what we'd be looking to charge. We'd have this study. In essence, we'd reach out to those interested parties and then see if out of the study, they have further interest in pursuing the requirements to do this. So it's really the first step in just trying to see the viability of it.
The scope of work, one of the first bullets in the summary is, they're gonna quantify the quantity, confirm the quantities of high strength weight, including fats, oils, grease, or food waste, so there's already source separation at restaurants, many restaurants of the grease. Again, Reno Renderings handling that now, but the sort of food waste, we don't have agricultural processing up here. There's no real food waste, so it sounds like that's possibly, would that be really commercial restaurant food waste, or is there a concept that you're gonna try and would there be some sort of source separation at a residential level? Is the residential food waste even on the table in the,
I don't see us changing the program that Keep Truckee Green is established with TTSD for the current setup for the residential services. Yeah.
And I live in Truckee, but
Yeah.
I've got a giant green waste, but it's pine needles. It's not, it's not high strength, it's not putrescible
Mhm.
food waste. So I'm not familiar with the Keep Truckee Green. Do they have a kind of
They have-
compostable program just with commercial establishments right now?
Yeah, so there's thresholds that Cal Recycle and the state bill require for commercial businesses to divert their food waste streams in California. Truckee also offers residential services in the form of 2 boxes. One's behind the town of Truckee's location there, the other's over by Powder Pass Road in the hardware store, where you guys can drop off your food waste and choose selectively to divert. It's an optional, it's not mandatory for residential services, so, and then also you think ski resorts as well typically trigger the thresholds for that tonnage that has to be diverted out of the landfill. So it's a combination of both. It primarily would be residential services, or not residential, sorry, commercial services for the food waste redirection from composting to Nevada would be the big driver. The fog's a little harder to lock down with the private business running the program locally in our region, and it seems like I would be nervous of getting full commitment from them without a contract in place. But yeah, those are intents as part of the study is to lock down. And we got some preliminary numbers back in Placer County and TTSD prior to the study. That is kind of basis where the consultant said the study does make sense to further evaluate them, so.
I have a question, Scott. So Reno Rendering, are they just basically a hauling company, or do they do processing, hauling and processing?
So they do process the fog as well. They claim they make a brown grease that's a marketable product for the fog, but they clearly still have interest in redirecting it our way. So I don't know what their business makeup, if it's more profitable to do the hauling removal piece of it more so than it is the actual rendering portion of it. So I don't know. Michael, do you have any other comments you'd add from your conversation you had with them the other week?
The conversation was that they have about 5,000 gallons of a week extra rendered material that they would be willing to bring up here. We didn't go back and forth on whether they'd be charging us to take it or we'd be charging them. They do take a truck or two to, I thought he said, they're like Carson City plant to their digesters, and they're using it there. He didn't know how they were feeding it in or if they had a holding facility or anything like that. He didn't have a lot of information on that side. But I passed that information on to them, to Scott, so that he could pass it on to Brown and Coldwell so that the consultants could reach out to him and get a little bit better information. But
So for the work scope, it'd be helpful when they're identifying, quantity of material, to know what the quantity of material is that's generated from within our service area as compared to, like with the Reno Rendering quantity. I don't know if that is excess material that is generated partly from up here and partly from, Reno, Carson, other areas, or is that all material that is being generated up here that if it came here, it would eliminate the trucking, down the hill or back up?
I would assume it was would be the first, it would be a combination of both.
Mhm. Yeah, so that, just thinking about this, I'd wanna be thoughtful about, are we trying to set up a service that is really scaled to accommodate the demand from within our region, or are we trying to be a receiver of material from outside of our customer base? And there may be there may be efficiencies that would cause us to want to scale up, but I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't, just my initial thought is, we've got a service area, we've got a customer base. If we've got new ways to accommodate that customer base, that's great. If there's advantage to adding capacity beyond that because it makes the economics better, I'd certainly be open to that. But I think understanding kind of what would we do to size it for our customers versus what might be more economically viable, that would just be helpful information.
Okay.
In deciding whether to move in this direction.
Have we reached out to the Carson facility to see what they're doing?
No, I just got that information. We just got back from the trip with nature removal. So Michael, I think, emailed me late last week after having the conversation. I have not had a chance to
And
further
then
evaluate it.
to get into the minutia a little bit of the contract and under the project assumptions, there's a bullet point towards the end of and it says that an associated project cost of $10 per labor hour is added to cover costs per person in computer aided design computers, rubber graphics, telephone postage, express mail services.
Yeah,
Are we kind of like, to me, that's very nebulous and could,
it's a boilerplate, item. From what I've been seeing around in Caldwell with the invoices, they're gonna invoice us for the line items for the task orders as they are, but that'd be for anything additional. We live in a digital era now, right?
Okay.
So if we're asking for like, we decided, oh, we want 10 copies of the final tech memo sent up, then they would just bill us at that rate to prepare those copies. But otherwise, the assumption is all digitally supplied copies of tech memos and final reports and cost estimates. So they're just putting a catch-all on there to protect themselves if we do end up asking for anything outside of the expected scope of what deliverables would look like, so.
okay, thank you.
So, thanks for following up on our direction last board meeting. Seems like there's an opportunity for the agency, this project to be beneficial in terms of gas production, possible tipping fees, benefit to the community in providing that service. And there's a nexus with this, estimated $20+ million digester boiler project that's going on now. So it makes sense to explore this at this time. And so,
Just one other thought that comes to mind, and this is probably not in the existing work scope, and I'd be curious if the other directors would like to see this information, but if there's any way to estimate the amount of, I'll call it reduced trucking, right? Because what it sounds like is happening now is fats oil, we got a company from Reno comes up, collects fats, oils, greases, hauls it back to Reno, processes it back there. I don't know how much truck traffic that's generating. And then we've also got food waste that's being collected within our customer base that goes to Tahoe Truckee Sierra Disposals facility. And then they're doing something with it and then trucking it, it sounds like, to Nevada
Yes,
to dispose of it. I'd just be curious, I mean, another potential, benefit to the region, even though I think it's small, was, the less trucks we got running around, on I-80 and up and down the hill, probably the better. I don't know if that's like one truck trip a week or if it's 10 a day, if we could get any sense of that as part of the work that Brown and Caldwell's doing.
Yeah, I think I think it would be a question, question for a question here, I'm sorry, but, would your intent to be just knowing the reduced number of truck trips potentially that would be impacting the region, or would you be looking more of a CO2 or a fiscally related question like impacts the roadways and damage, or are you thinking CO2, or are you just thinking specifically more of just the truck trips traveled and?
Yeah, I would try to figure out impacts to roadways, but I can see a number of truck trips diverted and then maybe equivalent greenhouse gas
Okay,
reduction. I think those would be not too difficult to drill into.
yeah, and I think we could play off that contingency amount with that additional request.
And some of that's probably gonna depend on the willingness of like TTSD to share information with us and Reno Rendering to share it with us. If they're willing to give us that information, that's one thing. If it's a more significant effort, then maybe it's not worth getting it.
Yeah, I think TTSD might have preliminary given us the number of truck trips. I can't recall offhand when we had a dialogue. Do you remember, Richard, in that call? How frequently they were hauling?
Yeah, I don't recall the,
Yeah, so it's a big driver is the cost of the hauling piece all the way out. I think they take their food waste all the way down to like Carson City area or Minden, so it's a pretty substantial truck trip. So
Right.
I think Brown and Caldwell could pretty easily quantify that into greenhouse gas emissions. Well, side note in the study, to add what that anticipated CO2 reduction would be. So
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
But no, so
Now, it's also gonna tell us how many trucks are gonna be coming here, right? Same
yeah,
number.
Yeah.
and we could set the terms on frequency. So I think something to keep in mind is we would need to have some sort of receiving tank if we end up going this route. And that's something the study will evaluate the size of that receiving tank. So that we can continuously feed in, and basically meter in the food waste if we were gonna take it. So it's not like they would just hook up direct to the digester and pump a huge slug of food waste right in unprocessed, right? There'd be multiple steps of requirements for them to get that food waste to be received here. And so a receiving tank, as well as the frequency of truck trips are all stuff we can establish with them to make this beneficial. So it's not like they're just gonna get free rein and we're gonna. That's the whole point of the study is for us to establish what our requirements would be for them to do this. And then at that point, if they're not interested, we can say, well, we offered it and provided you guys expectations on what would be needed for us to take this while still meeting our requirements.
Do you know if the food waste that currently flows through Truckee Stair Disposal, if that, are they slurrying it or are they just hauling it in kind of raw form?
In raw form, as I understand it right now, they are not slurrying. They would need to put a little bit of infrastructure in, which would require some coordination with Placer County, who owns the property. And that's kind of, I think, the biggest pinch point is what amount of infrastructure are they willing to pony up and put on their site, right? So, and then the other part of the program that would need to be changed is, I think as of right now, the food waste allows for coffee grounds to be included in. And so we would need to potentially talk to them about removing that from the waste stream so that we don't get inorganics rid, in a sense, going into our digesters from coffee grounds.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Anything else from staff? We have a recommendation before us to approve a study, not to exceed amount of $55,000 to look at high strength waste.
So moved.
Second.
Get that, Kaylee? Okay, we have a motion, a second. Any public comment at this point? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Look forward to the next update on that one. Item 3, update and discussion on the nutrient removal alternative study.
Morning, Board of Directors. Obviously something we've been talking a lot about over the last several months. Part of the original discussion when we were nailing out scope was the level of involvement the board wanted to have and number of updates we wanted to receive. So today we're going to be doing our second major update. Lots of really interesting progress has been made. So we brought in the big gun today. We brought Pete from Carollo. So he's going to do a brief presentation and then we can have plenty of time for questions, clarifications.
Jason, please. Thank you. Good morning, board. Thanks for the opportunity to present on this project. So just a quick agenda here, what we'll go through. So since it's been a couple months since we last presented on this project, I wanted to first give a quick overview of the project objectives and scope. And then we'll get into the detail of the alternative screening approach that we took for this project, and then some next steps. So just quickly, the project objectives, we wanted to compare available nutrient removal technologies to identify the best solution for TTSA moving forward into the future. And then investigate financial feasibility of alternatives and compare those to your current plant, to the status quo. And the improvements that that's going to require for maintaining your current plant in operation. And then select the option that best fits the agency and the community. And then from there, develop that selected alternative to a 10% conceptual design level. So the project scope included these 5 tasks. We basically completed tasks 2 and 3, which were to gather all the existing information, baseline information, and develop the evaluation parameters, which we presented at the previous board meeting in July. We evaluated the existing facilities and are wrapping up a chapter associated with that. And now we're into task 4, which is to evaluate the different alternatives for nutrient removal for the beer plants. And we'll present part of that today, the first step in that process today. So if you recall, as Jason mentioned, there were several touch points with the board for this project. This little process flow diagram shows that the process that we're going through to develop the alternatives. The first workshop, there's the first board meeting that we had back in July, we presented on task 2, which was the evaluation parameters and what we're going to use to evaluate the universe of alternatives that we came up with. And then this board meeting here today is to present the results of this first screening process to get from what we call the universe of alternatives down to 4 that we're moving into, 4 shortlisted alternatives that we're moving into a deeper, more detailed design or evaluation. And then once we get that down to 1, we'll come back, present the selected alternative of those 4 that will then take to a 10% of the design level and present that final one at the final board meeting for this project. So with that, we'll get into the alternative screening discussion. This funnel graphic here basically shows this process that we're going through with the brainstorming the universe of alternatives. We came up with, I believe, about 10 that we narrowed down now to 4. And so those 4 that we're going to take into this more detailed evaluation where we actually, we've developed already some process flow diagrams, coming up with site footprints, coming up with what all the considerations are associated with operations and maintenance for each of these alternatives, and then come up with ballpark costs for these 4, as well as O&M costs and total life cycle costs. And then once we select the one that makes the most sense, we'll move that on to 10% design level. So stepping back a little bit, considering potential future permit limits, the agency, as we've dived into this effort, TTSA has some very stringent requirements for effluent with respect to nutrients for total nitrogen and total phosphorus, and the most stringent in the country. Right now, at monitoring well 31 in the disposal field, you have a total nitrogen limit of 3 milligrams per liter and a total phosphorus of 0.3. So that's nearing the limits of technology these days in terms of what can be done. So your process, when it was built in the 70s, was challenged to meet those as well, with a lot of chemicals to get there. Now we're looking at going towards a more biological approach rather than a chemical intensive approach. And so those are kind of what we were focusing on in terms of alternatives to get away from the chemicals and into more biological approach, which is still challenging. And then in the receiving water down in what these are the limits for Martins Creek, the receiving water, it's having even more stringent limits there of 1.45 and 0.05. Currently, you don't have to meet those limits because you're going into soil aquifer treatment, but there is a possibility or a potential that your limits could get more stringent in the future with an updated permit from the regional board. So we want to think ahead and understand what implications that could have to whatever alternative we're moving forward.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on these effluent criteria compared to, you know, California and the rest of the US? I mean, are these really kind of, you know, that world of treatment plants out there? This is not a standard
It's
sort of
definitely
level of
not,
treatment?
yeah, it's definitely not typical to have this low nutrient limits. Most of the plants in California, well, in the Bay Area, they're only starting to have nutrient limits. And typically what you see is a total nitrogen of about 10 is very common to see in the industry for when you do have nutrient limits. So that's typically when you're discharging to a stream, or a river. When you're discharging to the ocean, they're only now starting to implement some now in the Bay Area, with nutrient limits there. So historically, yeah, for receiving water such as rivers and stuff, it's typically been about a 10. Phosphorus may or may not be, it depends on the receiving water and if it's impacted by phosphorus, or there's determination that receiving water has a potential to be impacted by phosphorus. So some have TP, some don't. TP typically see, I think the average I've seen is around 1 milligram per liter TP, or you're at 0.3 and possibly even down to 0.05. So it is very stringent. Comparable utilities that have similar permits are Tumwater, which also, you know, just ends up in the Truckee River. So they have a very similar limit to what you guys have down in Reno. And then there's some facilities up in Washington that discharge the Spokane River that have some similar permit limits. And then some, Florida is starting to implement very stringent nutrient limits. What you're seeing in Florida is commonly about a 3. Is what you're seeing in a lot of the newer permits coming out of Florida, and then some up in the East Coast have some similar limits to what you guys have, but it's few, it's the exception, not the rule.
But our sister agencies, we're doing a comp study where we've identified a bunch of comparable agencies, most of them kind of in the valley, you know, the coast and in the bay. Those
They
treatment
don't have
plants,
stringent
none of
limits.
them are producing an effluent quality of the level that they're producing.
Fairfield City does not have nutrient limits currently. Most of them do not.
So regulatory, would we be, because we're on the Truckee River, be regulated more stringently than the rest of California?
Right, that's the
Because
reason,
of that.
yeah,
All right.
that's Truckee River. Yeah. It ends up in a terminal lake down there in so,
Thank you.
sure. So, thinking through this, the way we've kind of, we've used this matrix to sort the alternatives into a few different categories. So we're looking first, you know, this is the liquid stream and looking at, okay, what are the options here? So we have conventional biological nutrient removal, or BMR, which is basically your conventional activated sludge process, but a little expanded to hit these low nutrient requirements. Then there's several intensification processes, and a lot of these are newer technologies that fall under this intensification approach, which really means to try to reduce the size of the facility by intensifying the process. And so we'll go through some of these, but there's several that we looked at that fall under that category. And really that's just looking at it from a cost perspective, right? If you reduce the size of the facility, can we reduce the costs and also maybe simplify operations with some of them? And then the last one there is aerobic granular sludge, which is a newer process that it's kind of its own category. It looks to basically create granules of sludge that similar to activated sludge, but a little bit different take on it. And not really, doesn't really fall into the intensification category since it's kind of its own animal. So, and this is what we would look to meet these current limits of 3 and 0.3. If you do get down to these lower 1.45 and 0.05, we were just looking ahead to what could be added on to get you there. And so basically what you're doing is adding on a tertiary process. You already have filters, which is good, but we might need to go to something a little bit more such as advanced floc sed. Basically, it's sort of like adding a water treatment plant onto the end of your wastewater plant. So advanced floc sed filtration, possibly ozone, granular activated carbon, and then hopefully not microfiltration or RO, but depending where those future permits land, it could be one of those options or a combination of those. So back to the conventional, so for the conventional biological nutrient removal approach, there's a variety of different configurations that you can go with, but there's really just one, which is the 5-stage bar info that would reliably meet your current nutrient limit. So it's called 5 stages because there's 5 stages in there. There's starting with an anaerobic stage for phosphorus removal, then you have an anoxic, followed by an aerobic, then another anoxic, and then a final aerobic phase. And so this cycling of the air on and off is what gets you that nitrification and denitrification that you need. And then there's a lot of internal recycle in this process because you're returning the mixed liquor in the process to help keep things going. So it's about a 4Q or 4 times your influent flow that gets recycled around in this process. So this is what we would be looking at for the conventional approach. And then this is a list of basically the final alternatives. So there's maintaining your existing process and rehabilitating your existing facilities to keep them functional for the next 25 to 30 years. The conventional biological nutrient removal is alternative 2, which is the 5-stage bar info reactor, because that's the one that best meets the current limits, current nutrient limits. And then the intensification processes, we looked at six different ones that we kind of shortlisted from all the ones that we know of that are available in the industry. And these are the 6 that we felt could best meet the needs of the facility. And so those include, and so these all start with sort of the conventional approach, but then because we're intensifying it, it reduces the footprint, and we're adding on a certain process to get there. So for intensification, we looked at a biomag facility, which uses magnetite for biofilm growth, mobile organic biofilm Nuvota, which is a process that they're piloting right now down in Tumwater, which uses CNAF and organic media to grow biofilm. Membrane aerated biofilm reactor, which basically uses a membrane that grows biofilm to optimize that process. Densification, which uses hydrocyclones to get better granules in the process. IFAS, which is another fixed film process using plastic media to grow biofilms on. And then finally, a membrane bioreactor, or an MBR, which is basically pulling the process through a membrane to provide sort of ultrafiltration through it. And then finally, the granular activated sludge, also known as aerobic granular sludge. So, I wanted to show this chart just because it sort of gives you an idea of the different technologies and kind of where they are in terms of how long they've been in the industry, how many people have adopted, or how many agencies and utilities have adopted these technologies. And so the ones that I highlighted here in orange are the ones that are on that alternatives list that I just put on the previous page. And so, as you can see, some of these, the MBR, bar info reactor, those have been around for a while. They're established technologies. Some of the other ones like Nuvota are still kind of in that first generation that they're being implemented. There are some full scale facilities, but not a lot. So there's less known about, or less track record, I guess, for operating these. So just kind of wanted to show that, just to give you guys an idea of where these fall on this this chart for how long they've been around, basically. I won't get into detail on this one because I know it was presented 2 months ago. This was a screening approach that we used to take those technologies that were in that table and screen them through looking at economic factors, so both capital costs and O&M costs, technical parameters, and making sure that they can meet the objectives of your plant in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus removal, environmental considerations, footprint and auxiliary systems that are required, constructability, coordination with other improvements to the facility and the regulatory environment, and then operation and maintenance requirements. So wanted to consider all of those in the screening and get us, basically we used a 1 to 5 scoring process for each of these to kind of get us down to the 4 that we are shortlisting. So finally, this is the results of the alternative screening process. So these were those technologies that were on the table. And the ones that rose to the top, rehabilitation of your existing facility did not rise to the top, but we're keeping that on because that is what we're basically preparing against. And then the ones that rose to the top in terms of the alternatives were BNR with densification, membrane bioreactor process, and activated granular sludge, or aerobic granular sludge, process. So those are the three that we're moving forward with evaluating further compared to existing facilities. So now I'm going to kind of go through each of those four relatively quickly, but just to give you an idea of what each of those consists of and where we're going from here. So for rehabilitating the existing processes, we're looking at only those that, just to get an apples to apples comparison, only those that would change if we don't go to something else. So we're looking at the cost of rehabilitating all of these facilities highlighted in orange here. So that includes all your post-strip process, your carbon, the CO tanks, our oxygenation basins, and possibly the filters as well, because those maybe or maybe not come out.
Ricky, I thought it was interesting, when I went on the tour with staff and the consultant to look at some of these facilities. And you shared, or one of your staff shared with me that, you know, that Corolla has a very seasoned person who models all these, and that the comment when he looked at our process flow that we currently have at this plant was, and I forget, dozens or hundreds of plants that they've modeled before, that this was the most complicated plant that he had ever had to model. This one, which, again,
True statement.
interesting, I don't think that you guys maybe know that out there. Maybe you don't, maybe there's the lane that you worked at and you assume everybody else does what we do, but certainly I don't think us up at the board necessarily recognize how complicated our plant is. It's not, both probably because of those effluent requirements that you mentioned are so much more stringent than anywhere else. And the fact that we had to get there back in the 1970s before some of these other technologies were there. But I thought it was interesting to hear just a good perspective for me to realize, that this is not a standard conventional kind of cookie cutter plant that, most facilities have to deal with it.
There's a sister facility to this plant that was also designed by CH2 back in the 70s on the East Coast, I think in Virginia, that has, it's a very similar plant. But that would be, it's pretty unique in that sense. And I think when back in the 70s, when they were trying to get these low nutrient limits that you guys had, they basically threw everything at it, right? So what can we hit it with to get there? And so it's a very chemically intense process, but you design a facility to meet these limits nowadays, you wouldn't go this route, but it's been able to achieve what you've needed it to do all these years. So, but yeah, it is complicated and a lot of needed processes, right?
Thanks.
So in terms of alternative one, it's just kind of a pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Obviously the advantages, you're familiar with the technology and the facilities, staff knows it. You're achieving your current nutrient limits for the discharge. Probably the lowest capital investment to rehab it versus, although we're still working out those numbers, versus building something new. And then you wouldn't need any additional land for meeting the current waste discharge limit. Disadvantages, the facility does have a very large footprint currently because of all the different unit processes here. It's very chemically intensive, as we discussed, lime, methanol, liquid oxygen, all these things need to get trucked up the hill to your facility, and they're costly. It's challenging to operate, requires 24/7 staffing, and then there's going to be significant rehabilitation required just because it's a 50-year-old facility. To keep it operational for the foreseeable future is going to take some work. And if you do get more stringent limits in the future with the MPDS, for example, it's going to be difficult to modify this existing facility to meet those. Sure. So those are the disadvantages with keeping the status quo. So alternative two is the five-stage Barton flow densification. This is just a process flow diagram showing what that process looks like. So you have the five-stage bioreactor up top that replaces a lot of the other facilities. So you can see a much simpler process flow diagram here compared to the previous one that we looked at with all the different chemical processes. So this is really a biological approach. We have the hydrocyclone for densification there that helps optimize the facility. And then you still have a phosphorus sequestration process there where you're creating a beneficial product that can be used for fertilizers and that sort of thing for that phosphorus out of the project, similar to the Ostera process that the Tumwater facility has down there. So this is what that facility will look like in the future with this process. And so the benefits here, lower SVI, increases your clarifier capacity. That's really due to the hydrocyclones. So you're decoupling your solids retention time, and that increases your nitrification capacity, reduces your overall bioreactor volume with the hydrocyclone compared to just a conventional using the densification approach. And you can also operate a facility like this in a low DO mode that a lot of utilities have been going to. So instead of operating at 2 milligrams per liter dissolved oxygen, they've been operating below 1. So that saves on energy costs. So this facility lends itself to operation that way with tuning. So challenges here, there's some tuning associated with the hydrocyclone, although that hasn't been, we haven't seen that as much of an issue. Achieving ideal particle size range with the hydrocyclones can sometimes be challenging to get. And then establishing the right food to microorganism ratio for promoting the densified sludge can be sometimes challenging, but otherwise this is a pretty conventional approach. Even if the hydrocyclones don't work ideally, this is a kind of tried and true approach to meeting flow nutrient limits.
So this is a completely separate facility that we'd be looking at.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in the next one when the next board meeting when we have all the facility layouts. Right now, we're working on those layouts, but yeah, basically we're going to be building bioreactors off to the side that we're going to divert the flow over to run through the new process and then bring it back. So in this approach, you would keep your filters, your pressure filters currently. So we would basically take your primary effluent coming off the primary clarifiers, go through the new process, and then run it back to your filters at the end. So what would go away is everything in the middle. So kind of the heart of the plant goes away, and you build something new off to the side, and then you decide what you want to do with the oil basin, whether you're going to repurpose it for something, and we come up with some ideas of what we can use some of those facilities for. Others would just be decommissioned and maybe eventually demolished to make room for future expansion or future facilities. And that's just a kind of what those hydrocyclones look like that you run the sludge through to densify it further. And so this one I thought was interesting. It just kind of shows what this densification is. So your typical activated sludge block is that top row. That's what that looks like. When you densify it with the cyclones, it gets a little thicker, and so you can run at a higher mixed liquor concentration and basically optimize your facility and get better settling sludge as well, which is the real goal there. And then the bottom one shows your aerobic granular sludge, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the granules that do that even further. So, so moving on to alternative 3, this is a Barton Fill facility with membrane bioreactor at the end of it. And so very similar. The difference here, you're adding a fine screen, 2 millimeter perforated screen after your primary clarifiers to protect the membranes. So the membranes are a bit delicate, and so you want to make sure to remove any large material coming through the plant. Right now you have 6 millimeter screens at the head of the plant and the headworks. The membrane manufacturing requires smaller screen down to 2 for the warranties. So there's that additional piece that gets added here for this process. But the nice thing here is really lost the graphic for some reason. So there's for that. But what the real benefit is to go to MBR is reducing the size of the facility. So you're reducing it by about a third to a half potentially in terms of the overall tankage and footprint. So that could lead to significant cost savings. You also get very consistent and good effluent quality because you're running it through this really small pores in the membranes that results in really low total suspended solids coming out of the facility. So you have very good effluent quality with this alternative. The downsides, it's higher power costs. You're having to run an air scour, so you have blowers, you're blowing more air into this and more pumping of return pumping. So those are kind of the offsets. You know, you've got a little bit more in terms of mechanical equipment and power costs, but smaller footprint facility. So aerobic granular sludge is the last alternative. You can see the nice thing about this one is it's very simple. You have basically one tank that does everything, but it's a sequencing batch reactor is what they call it. So it goes through different cycles in the process. Basically fill, aerate and drain process. So it's continually cycling through. And so what you have here to maintain continuous flow through the plant is you have a series of these that are at different stages of that cycle consistently. But it is, from what we saw, is fairly simple to operate, but it is, again, a newer technology. So these are, these photos here kind of show what those sludge granules look like. So you have much denser sludge in your tanks, which makes it much easier to settle and remove it from the stream. The figure over on the right is a facility. The bottom tanks there are the new facility, which is a AGS facility. And then the top was the old facility. So just kind of like the comparison in terms of the size of the facility, what it took to do that for versus with the AGS, much smaller footprint. So the benefits are smaller footprint compared to the conventional process, although not smaller than the MBR necessarily. But all the treatment occurs in one reactor, so that allows for that. You have less equipment, less mixers, you don't have recycle pumps, and you don't have clarifiers, so less energy there. And the challenges are, first off, it is less proven technology. There are several facilities out there operating this way now, but they haven't been operating for very long. I believe it started around 2012, so it's been about 10 to 12 years that they've started to go to this type of facility. It requires sequencing operations, so that's a little more challenging in terms of controls, and then very deep tanks. For this project, we're looking at 23-foot deep tanks, so they are fairly deep, and so that could add costs. So those are the four alternatives that we're looking at here in a lot of detail in the coming month or two. Already started that process, and we're gonna have some workshops that lined up with TTSA staff to go through those and hopefully get down to one in the next couple of months. That then we'll come back and present to the board where we landed on that selected alternative at our next workshop. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain this.
A lot of information, a lot of information. We're gonna kick it up to another level. Sophistication.
Hopefully down or
Simplification. That kind of, my sense is that these other alternatives are potentially, it potentially is a simplification of what we currently have
in
going.
terms of operations. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And with that, is part of the analysis being done and taking that into account? Like, I don't know if as time goes on, do we need fewer plant operators as an example for some of these processes? And is that part of the alternatives matrix?
Yeah, so that is part of the matrix and part of what we're running in terms of the overall life cycle cost analysis, looking at labor requirements, both in terms of operations and maintenance for the facility, looking at which alternatives require 24/7 operation, versus, maybe going dark, after hours. A lot of the facilities that we visited, don't have 24/7 operations, especially, conventional facilities don't typically require that, biological nature of movement. So, yeah, so there is that piece of it that we're looking at.
And then. Not sure what the term is, but I guess level of confidence that if we were to go to one of these other alternatives that, is it 100% level of confidence that we have that we'll be able to continue to meet our waste discharge requirements, or is it a?
Yeah, we would not recommend one that wouldn't be able to meet it. The one that we have the most questions about is the aerobic granular sludge, just because that track record isn't there yet, and none of the facilities that have aerobic granular sludge have as stringent limits as you guys currently have. We have seen data that it can meet those, including the Tumblr pilot that was done. But whether it can meet those consistently is still a little bit of a question mark. So there's a little bit more of an uncertainty with that alternative going there. So it's probably something that we want to maybe pilot if that does appear to be your best option moving forward, and we recommend that as that alternative, it's probably something that we want to test out for, maybe run a pilot for a year to make sure that it's going to be able to do it before we spend a lot of money in building the facility. So, whereas the other, conventional and MBRs, there are several facilities in the country that are hitting those limits with those technologies.
Richard or Jason or Ricky, maybe you could hit on this process you're gonna be going through to kind of try and shortlist that, the calling it camp
Yeah,
process and
and it's a somewhat proprietary process. I think the Crow developed, so I'll let Vicky run through what the process.
Yeah, it's just an acronym that we came up with that stands for Concentrated Accelerated Motivated Problem Solving. And really it's about kind of getting everybody in the room, all the decision makers, and everyone that has a stake in the game, getting them all in the room and kind of going through kind of a detailed review of each of the alternatives to make sure that, we've got everything covered, that we've thought about, all the impacts to your current facility and how that would be integrated. And so we're basically spending 2 days together, 2 6-hour days together, kind of walking through all of these 4 alternatives in a lot of detail and making sure that we've considered everything that we need to consider to accurately cost them out and lay them out and understand what the implications are for each, so that we can make sure that we're moving through the process and getting a good apples comparison for each of these.
And we're gonna get an invite out to all of the board of directors if there's interest in setting in on those, or the 26th this month and the 3rd of October. Depending on the interest, and I'll touch base with legal on whether we have to notice the meeting as a public meeting and all that's probably Brown Act, but we'll get that out. And been a very developing thing of moving the tours around and everything, so sorry for the kind of last minute notice, but just fitting it in on the calendar has been a bit of a challenge.
One other question, in terms of evaluating our existing, the rehab of our existing facility option, is part of what we're looking at, whether, because you mentioned like back when the facility was designed, they kind of threw everything at it because of the waste discharge requirement. Are there elements of our existing process that we could potentially do without and still meet our WDR requirements if we were to choose to basically maintain our existing processes? Is that one of the things that's being looked at?
Yeah, so to meet your current WDR, you need all your existing facilities that you have if you're not replacing them with something else. If you're not going to a biological approach, you still need the post strip. You're gonna continue to need that. You still need the filters.
Okay.
So there's no movement away from what you have if you don't replace it with something else. I don't think any of these facilities that you're currently operating are unnecessary for the process.
There are some facilities here that we're not currently using.
Correct, like, so things over in the AWT, like the Clino beds and those things that are no longer used.
Right.
Those could be decommissioned, and I think that there's already kind of you guys starting to kind of into that process of decommissioning those. So yeah, the carbon, regeneration, all that kind of stuff. That's over. And most of the things in the AWT building are basically unnecessary.
Right.
But in terms of what you're still running right now, you need to continue to run those facilities. So the biostir process, the oxygenation bases, the post strip, all that still needs to
Okay,
be maintained.
thanks.
Great, I'll add to it, I think the board maybe knows, but, I mean, we're looking at all these things in the process flow diagrams, you're pulling data. But, last week, like 8 staff traveled to Colorado and Washington to look at the facilities, talk to operators, at these facilities. So, I think that staff has also done another field trip. I think you guys went down, you said to Tumworth, the treatment plant for Reno yesterday. And so I think it's great that you guys are hitting the ground and not just looking at paper data, but talking to operators and seeing how these facilities actually operate on the ground in the real world. And so I think that's really important. And I traveled with staff, and I think everybody's sitting in the audience now pretty much were members on that trip, and saw some great questions and, full engagement by staff. And so taking this process seriously, and excited about this shortlisting process, and, I think looking at ways to try and utilize the existing infrastructure we have as best as possible, but yet potentially, looking at alternatives as well. It's gonna be an interesting process, so it's great. I don't think there's any action on this item, so it's just questions. I don't know if, you guys have any other.
I got a question. The reason we're moving forward and looking at this, is this plant falling behind in its technology as far as for, where we're headed in the future? I mean, when we brought on BNR, we were bringing on a level of sophistication that was unsurpassed in the industry, and that's only been 15 years ago. And has the technology accelerated to the point where we're falling behind in our treatment facility here? Is that?
So I guess I would say in terms of the driver for why we're looking at this now is really the rehabilitation costs for all the facilities that were built in the 70s, right? So you have a lot of this plant, more than half the plant that's over 50 years old, still in operation. And so the costs of that are significant. And so what the thought is do we continue with the status quo and operate this facility that's pretty intense in terms of operations, chemical use, and maintenance? Or is this the time to look at what other options are there that might be a better path for the future in terms of just being less intense in terms of operational and maintenance costs? And so that's why we're looking at this in terms of like a life cycle cost analysis, not just, capital costs, what it is going to take to operate your facility moving forward for the next 30, 40 years, right? So I wouldn't say that you're necessarily falling behind because you're meeting your discharge requirements. So you're still meeting the limits. It just takes a lot of effort, both in terms of staff effort and chemicals that are being used to meet those limits. And there's better ways to do it now. The biostir reactor that was put in 2004 or 5, is still used these days in certain facilities. So it's not like it's an obsolete technology. It's still used. It's just everything else but ahead of it that's a little more challenging. And then so when you're looking at other options, how does that biostir facility fit into a potential future facility? That's kind of what we're looking at as well. So
Thank you.
One other piece of information, you touched on the fact that our current process requires more heavily on chemicals than potentially one of these other processes would. Will this alternatives analysis quantify that?
Yeah. So we're looking at total chemical use. So we've got all the data that we've received from TTSA in terms of your current chemical use, also your operational requirements, your maintenance requirements, all the staffing that's required for those specific facilities to use as a comparison to the other alternatives and so we run the process models for each of these other three alternatives that basically tell us, okay, here's what you're most likely gonna need in terms of chemical use. And those are pretty conservative because it's a process model, so we don't want to underestimate that, so there are still chemicals that are needed, such as most likely ferric. Some kind of carbon addition is likely to be required, may or may not be needed, but we're gonna plan for it just to make sure. So there are some chemicals needed, but a lot less than what's currently used, so. And so that's part of that life cycle cost evaluation as well.
Then maybe a question, Richard. So I appreciate that you're thinking about inviting board members to participate in that. I guess is it the camps process?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess I might be interested in that, but I also am concerned I could get in the way just because you all have a much higher degree of, knowledge over these details than I know that I do. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, it would be very interesting if you could attend. There's a lot of the whys will be discussed, why we're going in certain directions, but it might be helpful. I don't think that any of the board members would get in the way of the process myself. You can attend, at least Earl's gonna have some doing remote attendance, so we can set it up as remote too, so you don't have to physically be here either. So even if you just wanted to kind of listen in and observe the process, even is an option.
Yes. Do you know how is it like a full day?
It's 6 hours each day.
So,
The first day is really focused on kind of the process part of it. I believe the second one on the third is gonna start some more of the financial elements of it.
so schedules only allowed for participation in portions of a day. Do you think that would still be useful, or is that gonna be detrimental?
I've never been through one before. I kind of heard Ricky.
Yeah, I'll get you kind of a detailed agenda here by the end of the meeting that maybe you can use to kind of see, you can decide which ones maybe most description, which parts of it will try to stick to the agenda, but
Yeah, it's just gonna be more to do with other commitments.
Sure.
And whether to,
Yeah, maybe it'll be helpful also if you guys have an agenda for the items and there's 2 meetings with 2 separate sort of objectives. Might be helpful for board members to decide which one they want to go to or what parts, if they see the topics that are sort of being discussed.
Yeah, they'll be fine like that. We'll get it sent out.
you said it's the 26th and
The Thursday.
they're both Thursdays, so
Thursday.
Yeah, it's scheduled for next Thursday.
Okay, anything else from the board?
I've got one quick
Great,
question.
go ahead, Scott.
You alluded to going dark.
yeah, I didn't mean like shutting down the plant, I just. mean-
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
If you could explain a little bit more, would we still have any staff here or is
So
it?
there's facilities, so like for example, the MER facility we visited in Washington, the smaller one, they don't have staff at night. They have an operator, comes in the weekends for a couple hours, does some checks, some routine checks, that sort of thing, but they basically work 410, so they have staff 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then on the weekends, they have somebody come in for a couple hours and just check on things, so they don't have any staff overnight at that utility. Some of the other ones do still have people overnight, so but for a lot of these technologies, you don't need 24/7 staff.
Question. I don't know whether folks who attended the tour or just listened to this. Obviously, the camp thing is where we're gonna dig into it, but before we move on, if there's anything else from staff, anybody else add to it? It was a good presentation. Thanks, Ricky.
Yeah, I think during the manager updates, we were planning on maybe talking a little bit about sewer.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Takes us to item 4, seeking authorization to execute a navigation easement with the airport district.
Correct. So part of the ongoing land exchange with Airport District required a navigation easement for parcel C, which is at the end of their runway. It's an unused portion of our property. So we had our legal staff work with airport's legal staff to draft the agreement. So that's what's before you today for authorization to execute between the board president and myself with the airport district. And as part of that land exchange, and as one of the steps necessary to bring that to conclusion.
My recollection was, you know, we were gonna give the airport land up against the hillside. We were getting from the airport the kind of flat land that's just before you turn onto Butterfield. And we were gonna provide them with this navigation easement. And so we need to give them this navigation easement. If we execute this first, it's a precursor required before we can do the land swap. It's either we're, not that, you know, I don't think there's any kind of bait and switch thing going on where we give them this like navigation easement, which is what they really wanted, and then the land swap doesn't happen is, you know, but
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm supportive of this. I know sometimes when you've got real estate deals like this, it's like everything like ends up at the title company and everything gets executed and recorded currently
right,
to make sure that some party doesn't flake out at the last minute and
right.
when some other party does. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, and the intent was to have everything for you to approve today, but unfortunately, legal counsel had some personal issues going on, so we weren't able to wrap up that final piece. So this part was done as well as the next agenda item, so we were just trying to tick these off and get to that next one, hopefully next month, and we can put it in the rearview mirror.
And while we authorize you as general manager to execute this agreement, that doesn't mean you walk out the door right after this meeting and do it. If you feel more comfortable, you've got authority now that it does get packaged. And the other thing, but at least they know that, you know, that authority has been given.
Correct.
Then that.
In all reality is, as board president, Blake, you be the one signing it, so.
Okay,
Once we
all
kind of
right, so I'll work with
get
you.
agreement on it today, if it's all given the stamp of approval today, we can certainly hold on to it and get all the final signatures done at that last piece next month.
Okay,
Because we've got, so there's this navigation easement, there's the lease amendment with the Truckee Downer PUD.
Correct.
Did we do the lease amendment with the school district?
That one's already completed, yes.
We did that one. And the lease amendments, those are less problematic because we're not.
Yeah, those kind of needed to be done anyways, because as we've gone through this process, we realized that portions of the well site were actually within the boundary of the school district's lease, so we needed to clean those up anyways, as well as, and this is the next agenda item, but some other items that was in the lease with TP.
Right, and then the last pieces are gonna be basically, so is it a lot line adjustment that we're doing to modify the parcel boundaries, or are we actually acquiring new parcels of land?
I'm gonna, Scott's been the one working on it. I don't think there's any lot line adjustments at this point, so it's just the exchange of the parcels as mapped out, and then, because as you know, one of them is not within the town. So we would end up with a parcel that has a portion within the town and a portion within the back end. I'm kind of figuring to get the exchange completed, and then we take the steps to get that parcel moved into the Truckee's sphere of influence.
And are you referring to lot line adjustments with swap or with the lease agreement changes?
I was with the swap.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can, we were never clear, and it's just a technical detail, but it's kind of a question of whether you end up with new parcels of land or you move a boundary of an existing parcel to include, right, additional area. It sounds like we're gonna end up with new parcels.
Actually, there might be a partial adjustment for that one piece that had the, something, what do you call it? I'm escaping me, where the cans are all piled up out there. Cultural significance, thank you. There's a portion of the parcel that was gonna be exchanged. And instead of us taking ownership of those, we left it with the airport, so that parcel's gonna have an adjustment to it.
Okay. So, so we would have the easement document, and there's gonna be these, basically deeds, I guess, are gonna be executed, and then probably a subdivision, public agency subdivision map exemption process, it's final.
Correct, and that's some of the legal, feedback we were waiting for to get it finalized, that we weren't able to get for today.
So I think my only suggestion would be that we go ahead and approve this stuff now. I think we could do the lease amendments now. My suggestion would be that the easement agreement execution get kind of bundled in with signing the other documents where the land is exchanged.
Say that again. So although we're gonna approve this now,
Wouldn't actually
we
execute
wouldn't
it,
execute it until the whole, we execute everything.
do it as correctly. Yeah, I think we got the lease amendments, doing those now, that's good, get that cleaned up, but all the, because, you know, part of the compensation thing was this aggregation easement, right? In terms of getting the compensation even out, so I have no reason to believe there would be a problem in making this all work.
Yeah.
But I think that would be good business to just execute that easement at the same time the other documents transferring the land back and forth are executed.
Yeah, we'll hold on to it and put it with the rest of the packet that we bring next month, as far as actual signatures.
So with that, I move that we authorize the general manager to execute the application easement with the airport district.
I second.
Second, any other comments? Not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item is the amendment to the lease with the Truckee Donner PUD.
Correct. So I mentioned that one did align the, lease boundaries to match up with what's actually being leased by them, as well as some amendments due to the fact that they've installed a diesel generator for backup power at the facility, as well as sodium hypochlorite for disinfection. The original lease did not, permit those two items. So this has been modified to allow them to do that.
And this is PUD, lease agreement, is that eventually gonna end up on airport property?
No,
Does that remain on our?
Yes, it's on our property.
Okay, so it's not really tied into the land
No.
exchange at all?
Only
Yes.
from the sense of one of the adjustments for the lease portion, there was a portion that would have been having not adjusted this boundary.
Okay,
If that makes sense.
and so does this supersede some previous agreement?
It does.
Okay,
But move that we authorize the general manager to execute the lease amendment with the Truckee Donner PUD.
Second.
motion in a second, any other comment?
Question. Now, what we're doing was we're modifying the lease, agreement with Truckee Donner PUD for the well, for a generator to be placed, backup generator for the well.
Yeah, they
And that wasn't part of our original, lease agreement. It was just for the well site and the access to and from.
the original lease, had an exclusion in there for any type of hazardous, chemicals such as diesel fuel or sodium hypochlorite. So it modifies the lease to allow them to have those on site. They already installed the generator and have been using sodium hypochlorite for disinfection. So it's just a cleanup of
We're
that.
just cleaning this up.
Yeah, as well as a adjustment to the boundary of the leased property to match up with the exchange pieces that are coming and to get a portion out of the, school district's leased area.
Okay.
And Richard, the map exhibit in the, lease agreement really seems to be a square area around their well. But they've got a fairly long access there, and I'm seeing a 20-foot pipeline easement. Is that pipeline easement is kind of overlays their access easement? It also provides them with access, because it's not right up against Georgia Drive. It's
Right, from what we researched, the pipeline easement, not affected by anything, so we didn't mess with it. But they actually access the well site down that dirt road.
right.
That we so far haven't found any type of easement agreement to allow them, allow them that access. So it's something we're gonna have to clean up in the future,
Okay,
with them, just to have something on writing, in case we all change hands and
okay, but
so.
the main purpose here was really to clean up the location of the well site and get rid of this inconsistency with regards to the diesel and sodium hypochlorite.
And correct, and as a piece of the land exchange to get that wrapped up.
And the, yeah, and you don't foresee any issues with that access road and the airport swap.
No, it's outside of the land swap
Okay,
area,
okay.
and talking with Rob over there, they're fully aware that, TPD accesses the site down that Chase Net Road.
Okay, so we had a motion and a second. Any other comment? Yep,
Yeah, well,
Dave?
do they have some kind of an inspection to look at, like the containment around that diesel generator and,
I'm sure they do. It is a double containment unit as well as spill containment for the sodium hypochlorite. The lease amendment requires them to meet all current, legal obligations, which they are doing. They have an operator that visits that well site every day, so
that was my question.
can't say for sure, but I would imagine that is part of their rounds that I can verify with the GM at TDQ.
And they also, let's say the lease agreement includes, insurance requirements to protect our agency if something goes wrong. Okay, so we had a motion second. Any other comments? Any from the audience? Seeing no, all those in favor of authorizing the general manager to execute the lease amendment with UD, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All in favor? And, on to a very important one. Item 6, approve authorizing, our annual employee appreciation dinner.
Yeah, so just seeking, board approval for approximately $12,000 to schedule our appreciation dinner that will be, in December of this year. So the, selected location is in Reno at, Silver Legacy, as we've done in the past.
Move approval.
Second.
I assume there's some discussion with staff as to the best location. You want to have maximum attendance. I also would love to see, if there's interest from staff, not this year, but in the future to, have events like this within our service areas so that, we're benefiting our customer base as well.
Yeah, traditionally, the agency swap locations, 1 year Reno, 1 year here in the region. So this year last year we did it here at the facility, did it during the day.
Right?
This year we're doing the after hours, so families can, or spouses can get in, so there is that rotation and there's a discussion about, where we select for next year here in the region.
Okay, thanks for that background.
Is the entertainment somebody from the outsider, or is it gonna be?
It'll be, a DJ like you've done, yeah.
So I think do we have a motion in a second?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, any other comments?
Yeah.
See you guys December 6th, something like that,
I think it's a 7.
7th, okay, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. And last item on the regular agenda is, an update from our land use policy ad hoc committee.
I spoke with Dan, I believe Dan was gonna give a update on the meeting.
Yeah, so Dale and I met with Richard and Jason, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. Talked about pretty wide ranging conversation, talked about different, kind of aspects of what this policy might consist of. Also talked with Josh about, asking him to do our attorney, to do some, kind of additional research on conflict of interest. So if, for instance, we were to surplus land and one of our member agencies was an interested buyer, should the board member who represents that member agency be involved with, those conversations or not? There's of those kinds of details, whether, my employment with the town of Truckee would create any, legal conflicts of interest for me. So Josh was gonna be doing some work on that, is my understanding. Correct. And then I think he was at some point gonna come back to the board with some analysis on that. And, give us his opinion on it, and then ask whether we're satisfied, or whether we want him to take that question further and get an official opinion from the FPPC. Correct. So that was one of the things that we talked about. Talked about that if we were, as a board, interested in identifying some land, to potentially sell. We had a fair amount of conversation about really wanting to limit that pool of prospective buyers to something much less than kind of anyone on the planet. Potentially just either utility providers or other governmental entities that are within our service area. And that was, I think, one of the things we talked about. We talked about that if we were gonna do it, we've got the work that Corollo did that had identified area that we need to hold on to, for the treatment plant, other areas that may be less critical. But I think those other areas were still a couple hundred acres, which we talked about. That's probably far more than we would, if we were gonna consider surplusing land, we probably don't need to consider surplusing that amount. It could probably be a much smaller amount, like a kind of a sub area of that larger area. We had some specific conversation about Truckee Donner Public Utility District, it sounds like they have some active work occurring on evaluating updating their facility off of Donner Patch Road or not. And it sounds like if we as TTSA were potentially open to selling them land for their operations base, that might be something we would consider signaling sooner rather than later. Because if we were to wait 2 or 3 years, then they may choose to move on and assume that we're not an option. We had some dialogue about that. And we also talked a little bit about, we have some land that has different environmental restrictions on it. And whether in the long term, it makes the most sense for us as TTSA to be the managers of that land, or if there were other entities like the Truckee Donner Land Trust, who is more, that's more their line of business, whether it would make more sense for them to manage that land. So there are other stuff we talked about, Dale.
You covered it pretty well, Dan.
Okay, it seemed like those were the topics. I think the one other question Dale and I had was, how much check-in does the rest of the board want us to have with you all as we're working on this, right? Because we could work with staff and try to get to a point where we've got this kind of fully cooked policy that we're recommending back to the full board. But, if other board members are in a fundamentally different mindset about whether we should be doing this or not, that could be a bunch of work where we kind of get off on a tangent that's not in alignment with the rest of the board, and which we don't want to do.
Yeah, I think I'd leave that up to your guys' judgment. I think we've got good representation on the ad hoc committee, sharing from what I've heard, say the different approaches. And so, if you guys get to a point where, before you even develop a draft policy to bring back to us, where you feel like, hey, we better check in with folks because you're leaning, do we want to lean this far? I think come back. But I'd love to see you guys be able to develop a draft policy, probably first agendize for discussion, maybe not action, but, get as far as you can. But if you guys come to a loggerheads and need sort of additional input from us, come back. But I don't know that short of that there's I'm not looking for a regular update on every, board meeting. If you're just making steady progress, you know, I like what I heard tonight, you know, today, where you guys are headed, and so, I don't know whether Dave or Scott, you guys want more.
So the one thing that I'm very sensitive to is we each represent a district, and, I think it's key that the districts are aware and of how we're progressing on that policy. It was part of when I was at NTPUD, Tuesday, I gave them the bare bones, and that I put together an ad hoc committee, and they were very interested to begin with. And that group, because they don't have like the interest of moving over here in any of the yards or anything, just wanted to make sure that, it was a regional, we come to a beneficial position that's the entire region. And so that, I think, as you guys, I have complete faith in you guys to maintain that, that's gonna be what we end up with, and that's one of the goals of the policy.
Could I chime in, Dan, just a little bit on what we also discussed is, that legacy trail that butts up to a lot of the land that's available for surplus, is a very, very sensitive and very controversial area, so to speak. It's property, the trail is used by an enormous amount of people and has a positive, feedback, for not only the town of Truckee, but for everybody that uses it. And, I personally would like to see that we maintain some type of a buffer zone between that legacy trail and, any property that, we might consider as sale. Because, I personally have gotten a lot of positive feedback from users of that trail. Dan spent an enormous amount of time lobbying this board years ago to get that trail through and completed. And, it's a very positive regional, asset, for people. And I'd like to kind of maintain a buffer between that trail and anything that, we decide as a board, to make surplus.
Sounds consistent with my thinking. I mean, I'm trying to remember that pink hatched area that was the potential surplus land and how close that got or overlaid. I wouldn't imagine it would have overlaid the legacy trail because there's, entitlements over that, but if it's awfully close, I think you're on the right track. I wouldn't want to do anything I would agree with that direction, to not do anything that would negatively impact the legacy trail.
Yes, of the trail.
So Dale, you said it's controversial. Is there
Well,
something?
you know what, if we were to sit back and, to surplus land that butts up to that trail, I think that you'd see some outcry.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was something besides that.
Potentially
No, no, no.
controversial.
This
Okay,
is
yeah.
strictly, at our last meeting, the Truckee Rotary Club is getting involved, with, enhancing, that trail with benches.
Yeah.
And, like I say, there's a plaque out there that happens to have my name on it. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people that's, use that trail. And, I think it'd be in our best interest as a board and as an agency that we have a buffer zone that would maintain the ambiance and the serenity of, the experience of people using that trail.
I thought there was something else
No,
going on.
no, the controversy
I think
would be
I agree.
for us to sit back and, make available a property that butts up to that trail.
Right.
Great. So appreciate Dave.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments that we're talking about sale of the land. I'm still concerned about maintaining some kind of and it could be on the title of the land if we sold it, but some kind of control of what goes on that land. I'm, concerned, about anything that goes into the soil that, you know, we get the blame for. I look at the bus barn. If you pull in there and look at their fueling stations, now I don't know what goes on there and I don't know if we inspect. Do we do any kind of, you know, I don't, as an old tanker man, and a merchant marine, I'm pretty aware of how you keep oil from going into water. And I look at that fueling station out there and there's a concrete swale runs right down into a dirt ditch. And if they spill, that's where it goes. There's no containment at the pumps. And I don't know what they regulate their drivers. I know, Alpine, regulates their drivers. In order for you to fuel a bus, you have to know how to, you put the containment gear out there, and there's a whole process you go through, and you have to take a class, which is, you know, third grade stuff, but it's still, I don't know that they do that. I don't know what they do. And I look at the ground out there, that is just ripe for oil running out of one of those, fueling buses and going right down a concrete swale. And it doesn't look like there's any kind of containment in that ditch. There's just a swale in the ground. That's what I'm worried about with the rest of the property. Yeah, you know, what do people do on this property? And does
Whether we have
PTSD
oversight on it.
Right. And that's what I'm asking, if we can put that in place.
Good comments for the committee.
Right, yeah, and some of the there's this detail, I think that'll be important for us, and so as a public agency, the state of California has established a legal process we have to follow if we were to sell or surplus land. And there's really two tracks in that. There's one where we can deem it be excess, or no, not excess, it's the right term.
You said unused or?
No, if Josh were here, he can help me out, but there's one track where we've got a lot more, ability to say, we're gonna just sell it to this one entity or these one or two types of entities. Exempt, so there's exempt surplus land and then there's non-exempt surplus. And if we have land that we're open to, you know, to disposing of, if it can fit in that exempt category, it gives us a much higher degree of control over how that, over who we sell it to and
What they do
what
with it.
they can
That's my concern.
use it for, as compared to if it's not exempt surplus land, then it's, we have less control. But at the end of the day, we can decide, we have the final authority on deciding whether we sell land or not in any circumstance. So that does put us in a strong position to deal with the kind of things.
And from what I heard from Josh a little bit was that not a bad idea to have it leased. And that wouldn't necessarily make us the landlords. We could put that out to a management company. But from a couple of things he said about holding control over what goes on the land, a lease,
Yeah.
not a bad idea.
Yeah, and maybe this is worth touching on, because I know, you know, Dave's brought that up a few times. Yeah, I think about, like, I'll use the Truckee Donner PUD as an example. Yeah, my suspicion is if we said we're only interested in leasing you property, we wouldn't be interested in selling you property. I don't know if they would be interested in a long-term land lease or not, but that may affect their interest or not, as an example. Just because, you know, putting buildings on leased land is kind of a risky proposition for the building owner.
Yep. I don't want to be the ogre in this discussion. But As far as this, being an agenda item, this was a report from the ad hoc committee, and I think we might be straying a little bit off track here. I'd kind of like to see the ad hoc committee meet, one or maybe two more times before our next board meeting. I think that, the meeting that we had was, a very good preliminary introduction to what, our goals are. I think we're on the right track. We met for over 3 hours and we just scratched the surface of what, the ad hoc committee's duties are, and, we're not gonna be moving forward with anything without consulting the rest of the board. But it's gonna take at least, I see, 2 more meetings. I'd like to see 2 more meetings, Dan, if you could fit it into your schedule. And to be able to, have a little bit more direction at our next board meeting of where we're headed as a committee. And then at that time, we could get some more input from the rest of the board on what Dan and I thought would be a good approach to this.
Sounds good. Why don't we wrap this item up? Again, thank you guys for being on that committee and look forward to the next report back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that ends the regular agenda. Let's keep moving if we can into the team reports.
Good morning, board of directors. I'm the Peak Operations Department Manager, for the month of, October. I'm sorry. Let's go back a month, for September. All the plant waste discharge requirements were met for the month. Plant performed well through the month. Weed abatement on the odor stereo biofield was completed. We added some media to one of our final effluent filters. As we're going through all the final effluent filters and adding, media that was lost through the year. Couple of work orders. Can you bring up the board? Can you go to the next? As, was brought up, last meeting, Blake, you'd asked for some further definition and, clarification for chemical costs, power costs,
Yeah,
and
great.
sludge hauling. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I brought back, I separated each one of them, gave them a 5-year comparison and, was just looking for some feedback. Is this what you were looking for?
It is exactly what I was looking for. It's great, Mike. And on some of these, most of the charts are pretty self-explanatory. When you see perhaps odd trends that, might come to one's attention, you could add notes to these, so that it's, if, for instance, on chemical costs, you might indicate the month that we switched from chlorine to sodium hypochlorite. And hence, that's why all of a sudden this year, that green line is a lot higher. If there are kind of events that happen, electricity costs, I don't know if PUD, did a giant rate increase. Why is our electricity costs? Are we using a lot more electricity? No, that's because there was a rate increase and we went from whatever, 7 cents a kilowatt hour to 15 cents. So if you see kind of things in the trends, and that goes for all the trends, feel free to add a note there to highlight that. But to answer your question, this is exactly what I was looking for, and is I think more better for us to, see what's going on in terms of our chemical, electricity and hauling costs. Yeah, it's great. Thank you for doing that.
That's all I have. Any questions for operations department?
Thanks, Mike.
Board of Directors. Right, so for the month of August, we devoted quite a few staff to a lot of different projects. As you'll see from our project list, it's we still have ongoing work at sodium hypochlorite. We embarked on a server upgrade project, took quite a bit of our time, our IT staff's time. Digestion improvements projects, nutrient removal, front gate project. We were able to wrap that up this month. Also, the SCADA, oh, excuse me, I apologize, I made a mistake there, but it's the same project, server upgrade and SCADA server project, so. Moving on to the plant maintenance activities, we upgraded some of the temperature and pressure transmitters throughout the plant for a lot of the newer filter press or, the CPEX pumps, that we purchased recently. We've been doing a lot of updates to the TTSA website, and doing some of the firmware updates for our firewall systems. We continue to enhance our security and do continuous testing on that. We had several broken windows throughout the plant. We were finally able to get somebody out here on that and get those replaced, thankfully. We also did some upgraded painting throughout the plant. So hopefully that's noticed at the entrance of the plant, also in our chlorine building and back behind the sodium hypochlorite building. Our intent is if we like this paint scheme, we'll continue with that process throughout the rest of the facility. We also did, we've been doing some plant landscaping. I want to give you guys some assurances that we're not spending a bunch of money on this because we've got some upcoming projects. We're going to be doing some big changes up there. However, we did want to beautify it and make it more appealing to the public and people that visit us. We did make some modifications to a dewatering sump down by vehicles. And one of the other big things we did was the Truckee Music Festival road closure. We devoted some staff on the weekends to that. We had the road closed down. We worked with Tyker to allow trucks to get back and forth. And it was a good event. We didn't have any issues and it worked out very well. So we worked closely with the security that was provided from the Truckee Music Festival. Worked out real well. We still have one information technology specialist on open recruitment. Hoping to continue to get some good resumes and applications for that. Hopefully we can get this wrapped up soon. Work orders have been impacted by a lot of the projects we've been doing. Our hope is as we start transitioning out a lot of these projects, we can start getting the work order numbers down. I do want to highlight that a lot of the work orders, the numbers do not tell the entire story. There might be a work order that's 1 hour. There might be a work order that's a couple of weeks. So the number really doesn't speak to the number of hours that it requires to take these work order numbers down. However, we're going to be devoting quite a bit of time to getting those knocked down throughout the rest of the year.
Paul, what is pending work orders on IT? 123.
So that speaks to the number of, it's a combined total of the preventative maintenance work orders and the corrective work orders that we have that are sitting in the queue that have not been resolved. So when it comes to preventative maintenance, whether it's, doing a check on a server, whether it's, replacing a battery, even on the PLC, these things build up. And when we devote a lot of time and energy to these projects, sometimes they don't get knocked out in a timely manner.
Right.
Any questions about the report before I move on to pictures? Go ahead. Right. So here we've got one of our newest staff members here working on the filter press feed pump temperature and pressure transmitters. To the right, you can see some of the enhancements we made for the sodium hypochlorite project. We decided to go in and add some drain rock back behind there in one of the swales for the drainage area. We like the look of it. We're going to continue, or we have continued on with that around the corner there and added some wood chips. Next one, please. That's what it previously looked like on the left. With the older wood chips, we've scarfed all that stuff out and put some new drain rock in. We think it looks pretty good. And some of the painting work that we've done over there. The picture on the right is the picture of the front entrance as we had a man lift over there trying to get some of that paint work done, trying to keep staff safe going in and out of the building. And to the left, we've got one of the flow meters being repaired. The center picture is one of the LED lights that we were testing for DO2 basins. And to the right is one of the enhancements we've made. We're bringing in a sump panel to SCADA, so that was something that came up during the month. And there are shiny new CPEX pumps for our filter press feed pumps. So both have been installed and are ready to go. Any questions? I can answer.
Anything for Paul? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Jason?
Good morning again, board. So just a rundown on some of the projects we're continuing to work on in engineering, digestion improvements is really getting cooking. Just this week, we were given several technical memos that are kind of the basis of design verification that we've got them working on. So we got tons of staff from all the other departments doing a review on those. Pretty intensive stuff, really interesting, mostly relating to boiler sizing, determining some of the alternatives we have for the cover on the digester, and some of the classification of hazardous spaces that we need to address. So moving along on those things, making good progress. TRI Alpine Meadow, the lining project. So far we've had really good response from all the permitting agencies. Nothing surprising at this stage. Everything's kind of rolling exactly how we anticipated. So that was great news. We have gotten substantial feedback from members of the public. So we reached out to some of the rafting companies, some of the bike rental companies that could potentially be impacted. And the response so far has been, thank you so much for planning on doing this after Labor Day. And also this is, for them, was a level of unprecedented for notice. So they were very happy. So that's working out really well. We've got a splash page on the website that when we issue public notices, we direct them to that splash page. So if anything changes on the project, we can update it there. But we are getting pretty close to narrowing in. It's looking like CIPP cured in place with UV cure is going to make the most sense, primarily because of the heat sinking involved with doing this underneath a river. It's going to be difficult to use steam or hot water to cure these. So we're looking definitely favoring UV. Nutrient removal study, Ricky Gray gave an excellent presentation. We've got our 4 shortlisted that you guys got a chance to see today. We visited a lot of facilities in a pretty short period of time. Blake, thank you again for attending. That was a pretty amazing trip in the respect of how engaged staff were and how much that extra input you get from talking to an actual operator that actually works in the facility. And it's mind blowing when you show up to a place and you're getting, a PhD with 30 years of experience walking you through stuff. And it really is, and then the Corolla team is fantastic. So, and again, we're preparing for that camp. But we had members, from operations, we had members from, maintenance, we had some folks, we had the general manager was in attendance, so that was a huge benefit. And it was time well spent. So then we are making some progress on the freight and transport study. So that's the study that the board, our regional board requested from us in order to have a potential modification of our permit and clean it up. So right now they've got a pretty extensive list of information that they're doing. Some of it looks like we have, some of it looks like we may not have. So this will kind of lead into that phase 2 of the study where they gather the information that we're unable to perform for right now. So we got about a 4-month window for completing phase 1. Operations is super responsive to providing information. So hopefully that really helps hurry it along. Laboratories continue to support a lot of the projects we're working on. It's kind of nice. It's been interesting work for them because it's stuff that we don't normally do in the laboratory. So we were asked by operations to support them in doing some gas sampling for the digestion improvements project. So we're kind of looking for methane content, siloxane content, hydrogen sulfide content, so we can start having discussions about scrubbing that gas if necessary. They are going to be performing their annual proficiency testing this upcoming month. And all the internal assessments are completed, and so far 0 corrective actions pending. So we got 5 of those done this week. So plant tours, we did visit Tumwater yesterday. Very enlightening. They are dealing with a lot of the same restrictions that we have at a much larger scale, and I feel like those are our brothers in arms down there. They really know what it's like to have to meet a strict requirement.
Now, where is this again?
In Reno. ton of work. It's the regional facility, treats sparks and,
Are they discharging into the river as well?
directly, yeah, they have tighter limitations than we do. So,
And how old is our plant?
a little older than ours, actually. 64, 65, yeah.
And it's all about Pyramid Lake, right? Kind of
Yeah.
control nutrient loading
Yeah.
of Pyramid Lake.
And they're also part of the Truckee River Agreement, which, you know, they can only use percentage water based on what was taken out of the river, and they're kind of clumped in with that whole thing too. So, yeah, they're very, very difficult regulatory environment that they're dealing with, and they're looking down the barrel of some substantially more strict requirements. So they're doing a lot of research down there, and they have offered us a ton of data. So cannot thank them enough. They've been a great resource.
Where's their plant?
It is, if you know where Sparks turns into Veterans Highway as you start heading south. If you look to the left, it's over there, right between Veterans and 80.
Okay.
It's kind of nestled over there just before you start heading into the canyon.
Do you know where UNR has all their, fields and they raise cattle and stuff over off McCarran? It's just on the other side of it.
Yeah, you can barely see it from 80 as you.
Okay.
So,
Is it the state of Nevada that establishes their discharge requirements?
yeah, and so, yeah, it's interesting that you would find yourself in a situation where Nevada is more stringent and
Mhm.
much more of a leading edge than California, but in this particular case, there's been some talk about having what they call non-detrimental limits, which is you have to identify limits that will prevent you from even impacting the water, let alone, a strict limitation. So
This is like what Ricky was talking about earlier. We're gonna add a water treatment plant to the end of your wastewater treatment plant.
they're not 100% sure what they're gonna do just yet.
Yeah.
They're studying a lot of things. They did some studies on some of the technologies that we're looking at right now, so they've offered all that data to us.
Are they influenced by the Washoe tribe
Oh, yeah.
as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the terminal, like, the pyramid is the main driver.
Yeah.
For all those nutrients. So, yep. But it was a good tour, and I believe this was on here last month. I probably left it on, but we did attend the Truckee Music Fest.
At the NTPUD meeting Tuesday, the president of NTPUD thought very highly of the flyer that we sent out.
Oh, good.
She said that she had gotten it and it was very nice to see something.
So that was a effort, so, yeah.
Yeah, there was the whole team, but
Mhm.
they really appreciated it, so good job.
Jason, on the TRI work between Alpine and Olympic Valley. So you're looking at that project for next fall. And I'm assuming what it will consist of is basically, like bypassing that, maybe in individual phases, but sections of the TRI to basically dry it out, clean it, put the slip liner in it, and then put it back in service and then move downstream or upstream in whichever
Yeah,
direction,
we're looking at doing it in one shot.
bypass the entire.
Bypassing, so the impacted manholes are 33 to 35. We're looking at potentially bypassing all the way from 32 to 36.
Got it.
And that way they would be able to do the cleaning, because there's some pretty extensive cleaning they have to get done.
Yeah.
And then, there is some concern. We have some interesting lateral drops along that. We don't have any siphons, but we do have some they're a little bit concerned, because they have seen instances where the line will go in and get stuck.
Hmm.
And if you're kind of pressed for time, then all the alarms start going off, and pull it out, push it, back and forth and,
Right.
ruining materials and all that stuff. So, right now they're proposing, potentially there's a road in the area that it's looking likely that we'll be able to utilize for fusing of the HDPE pipe. So if that is the case, then, we can dramatically reduce the amount of time we'll have that pipe backflow.
Yeah, that was my other question is, will we need to take the bike path out of service for the work?
It looks like, we did do some site visits, and it looks like the majority of that area, we will have the opportunity to put the bypass piping on the side of the trail,
On the side of what?
on the side of the bike trail, the.
Okay,
Truckee River Trail. So.
and so it won't be on 89.
No, it's, I think that is still one of the remote possibilities if we get shut down every other way, but right now, the far preferred way of bypassing will be either on the trail or to the side, besides the trail.
Now, how big a pipe is that bypass gonna be?
It's gonna be at least a 4-inch pipe, and it's gonna be redundant. So there's gonna be probably 4 of them. They're still working out the piping schema, but it'll have a ton of redundancy built in.
Is it gonna be pressurized?
No.
And what's the time frame?
It's gonna
Day for how long?
We're shooting for, I believe, the entire project is gonna take about a month and a half. But the lining itself, they're thinking in the 3 to 4 day range. If everything goes perfectly, it's potentially something they could get done in 24 hours. But they're kind of experienced and they know not to expect perfect, so, they're giving us a very conservative estimate of 4 days for actual activity. So those days when we're doing active, say, pipe fusing, we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do with bike traffic, whether we are far enough away from them, because that's a pretty hazardous process, with HTPE, fumes and all that fun stuff. So, and then when we're actively bypassing, we're gonna have to work that portion out. We don't know how many people we want stomping on a pipe that's actively bypassing.
Right. And then it's like, what is it, like 1,000 linear feet,
1,300.
1,300?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, most of the work we do is kind of out of sight, out of mind from the public standpoint.
Yeah.
But the TRI work, it's a little more front and center.
Correct.
Thanks, Jason. Anything else? Any other questions for engineering? Liz?
All right, well, in addition to the things that we always do, we have a few highlights this month. We implemented an ACH process, which is an electronic transfer of funds, so to speak, between us and the vendor. We did that because mail service here is a little unreliable. We had some instances where vendors were not receiving their checks timely. We would have to void, it made a more difficult process for us. So we implemented that, we had good success with it. We also kicked off our FY 24 audit. It was, I think I'm gonna say FY 25, that was just me being super excited. The idea is to wrap that up and hopefully bring it to the board by the end of the calendar year. Moving the audit to an earlier timeline will support all of these capital expenditures in the future when the rating agency takes a look at our financials. They like to see it done more timely, so we're stepping in that direction. Billing did all of the typical billing things, and you'll see in a few of the next slides that the billing reports are attached. For the purchasing administration side, the biggest thing we have to report, aside general duties, are we're going to kick off the P-card program, hopefully in October. We've been doing some behind the scenes testing and working, so we can get the credit cards in the hands of the credit holders and let them work the program. So taking a look at the next slide, those are the billing highlights, and the next few slides, I think, may be the actual billing reports. Let's find out together. No, they're not. So there's the purchasing item that I just talked about. As always, we also supported the general manager and the board of directors, and we held finance committee yesterday. We have pictures. I love when we have pictures. Not often our team has pictures, but Celeste went out and did some inspections, elevation escape. There's a materials walkthrough site that she took a look at. And I think the next slide maybe has Lake Tahoe specialty stove and fireplace plus residential unit. That's a big change. Used to be a commercial building. Now there's residential on the top and there's a fireplace and stove on the bottom. And I think that wraps up our report. Any questions?
Liz?
So Gallagher completed a job description salary range for the CFO. You're aware, we've got that posted and closes this Sunday. Continue to have internal discussions on master plan and rehab, as you're aware, as well as the other projects. continue to make progress on the top of the Truckee Airport District Land Exchange, and hopefully we'll have that wrapped up next month. Had the area general managers meeting that I attended, as well as the River Revitalization Steering Committee meeting. They have developed a breakout group for possible receiver sites that I'm sitting on. We had our second meeting on that last night. So they're kind of looking at somewhere between 50 to 65 acres is what the committee's identified as the need for possible receiver sites, and that's a lot of other options besides just our location here. But so those discussions are just starting. We had our first leadership training, and next week we'll have our second session of leadership training with all management supervisory staff team. We had our indoor heat illness prevention, which is a new requirement from OSHA, as well as an all staff meeting. We had our ACES Reno ACES night. And as mentioned, the annual newsletter went out to all the customers. It's nice to hear we got some positive feedback, as well as one feedback from the public that was shared. We have the recruitment for the CFO, and as Paul mentioned, one IT individual continue. We do have the sodium hypochlorite ribbon cutting scheduled for the 25th. Staff CPR trainings coming up, as well as WebTech in October, and some other conferences that staff will be attending as well. Any questions for me?
Can you give us a little bit of concept of the ribbon cutting?
Sure.
What's gonna take place and what all the plan is?
Absolutely. Working on the agenda for it. Right now, the draft agenda is pretty much accommodate tours, depending on, we're asking for RSVPs, so we don't want to put family on sitting. We've invited all member districts, GMs, as well as engineering staff, and any other board of directors that are interested, as well as a couple media individuals. So depending on what we get back, we're gonna allot for the first portion to be tours of it, hosted by our chief plan operator, our safety guy, as well as Scott Fleming, the design engineer. Figure those are the best three to talk on each of the individual points. Then we have perhaps a few words from the board president, GM, and myself, and staff for their efforts. So, but I'd actually figured I'd probably go first and turn it over to the president. We got a big pair of the scissors coming, and so.
Okay.
And then refreshments under the public outreach thing.
Is the tour a full plant tour, or is it just a tour of the new sodium hypochlorite facilities?
Both. We'll focus on the sodium hypochlorite initially, so we can get that event, done with, basically. And then anyone that was like, if we had media or any of the other directors or other engineering staff that wanted to see the facility, we would do that after the event kind of concludes.
Okay.
So not too long. I'm thinking, breaking up the tours on like 5 people increments, so that will take a little while on how many we get. And I mean, just, a few minutes of discussion for myself and yourself with me.
Okay, yeah, just trying to figure out my timing on that day.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And I was gonna send over some talking points that
Okay.
might help you.
Great.
So one thing to think about is whether or not to do the ribbon cutting thing first, so that if people want to stay for the tour,
Okay.
they can, as opposed to having them show up at one thing, and there's this ribbon cutting thing, and then the formal thing doesn't actually happen until later. That might help people's flow a little bit.
Right.
Okay. We'll make that adjustment.
Thanks, Richard. Anything else for Richard? Nope. Right. Opportunity for board of director comments. Scott?
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
Just so through my work, some of my staff have been interfacing with TTSA staff on a couple things. And they've been very complimentary as to the approach that the TTSA staff have taken. kind of solution based, and we were repaving the legacy trail when the TTSA, our TRI is under portions of the legacy trail, and they were just very complimentary as to how that coordination was working and kind of the solution-based approach that the TTSA folks were taking, so. Thank you, so I just wanted to pass that on for the benefit of the other board members.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions. Number one, Richard, are we fully staffed now other than the CFO, vacancy?
One IT, we have one IT staff still vacant.
Are we getting any, response from our RFP?
For the CFO,
No, well, the CFO was just posted, correct?
it closes this Sunday, so it's been open for, it was open for 4 weeks, so it's Sunday 4 weeks.
And have we had any response?
I think we've got at least 2. As of right now, okay,
Favorable?
first interviewing.
Okay,
Good.
the second, comment would be, is there any way, Dan, that we could, sit back and put together a date for,
Yeah, why don't we get with Richard after?
Yeah.
this meeting?
okay? That's it.
That's it. Dave?
I'm good.
Great.
Sorry, I did have one final item just to talk about the IT enhancements we made. I was just kind of watching, it looks like you guys are using the screens and I'm seeing a thumbs up.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge Lucas and Luke. I gave them a pretty unrealistic time frame to get it done and they pulled it off, so I made my own mind.
Nice.
So any enhancements you'd like to see on it, please provide feedback.
Sure.
Hopefully it makes it a little bit easier for you guys to see the presentations as we go through them instead of the others. The plan is when we have, like, I think Bailey will be remote next month, is the back screen will be the Teams portion where you can see the individuals, and that screen will always be for the public to see the presentation with the displays there for the board members.
Great, Richard. Yeah, that was one of the things I was gonna bring up was, one, this is great. That is a little distracting, I would say. I don't know whether, I don't think we have anybody zooming, so I'm not sure why I'm seeing myself.
We're running a test today. Today's
Yeah.
the first day that we, trying to transition off of Zoom and use Teams because
Okay.
it's part of our Microsoft suite that we're paying for, so I pay for two things.
Sure.
So it's a bit of a test today, so in the future, that would only get utilized if we have someone remote.
Okay, that would be great. And if someone remote is on, it'd be great for us to see them. Maybe I don't know what controls we have with the device, but to see ourselves.
Yeah, it will.
I found it a little distracting, but,
You don't like looking at yourself?
my tendency was that, even though I have the screen right here, I would look up there. And I'm like, what's that motion? Oh, it's me. And so, but these are great. I was gonna just say that, again, I appreciate being invited on the tour. And was highly impressed with, all the staff, and learned, something about those technologies, but actually learned a lot about our plant and the process of seeing those. And as I mentioned before, it was great, just we had folks from the E&I and the operators and everybody sort of dug into their area. And it was cool to watch that. I mean, there wasn't a single device. I don't think that Ryan, the E&I guy, walked past without looking at it, and lots of pictures taken of existing stuff. And so it was great to see folks involved in that. Talked about the ribbon cutting. The last one I was gonna bring up was just, we've gotten some, I wanted to pass on to you that we've gotten some complaints from, a complaint from a user at the park about the speed of traffic going down Jorger. Both, Tykert, we had a close call with one of our employees with a Tykert truck. And I contacted them, I contacted PD and suggested they do some speed monitoring out there to slow things down, but I've also heard feedback that, the non-semi trucks, just I don't know whether it's bus barn folks or TTSA employees, but it's a long straightaway and we're done with work and we want to get back out of here. But just to encourage folks to keep their speed under control. Hate to see an accident happen out there, and so, both our employees have mentioned it, and we did get at least one complaint, since we're right next door, they talked to us. I don't think it was a TSD person, because we can't get our speed up fast enough by the time we get to the park entrance. If we could, I'm sure our employees would do it also, but we've talked to our staff also about keeping speeds down, so
Spread the word.
just wanted to pass that on. I think that's it.
Real quick, I think we should thank Kaylee for stepping in.
Thank you,
So
Kaylee.
very
Nice job.
thinking.
Yeah, it's good to have redundancy, in your operations and your staff, so that's good. Thanks for stepping up. There's nothing else, then I'll move to adjourn,
So moved.
and we will adjourn the meeting. The fastest meeting we've had in a while. It's good work.